Take two people, same birthday, same city, same number of candles on the cake. One of them has the cardiovascular system of someone 15 years younger. Their cells divide cleanly, their inflammation markers are low, and their biological age, the number that actually determines how their body functions, reads closer to 40 than to 55. The other has a body running a decade ahead of the calendar, not because of genetics, not because of some rare disease, because of a set of ordinary, invisible, everyday processes that most people have never heard of. Your chronological age is just how long you've been alive. Your biological age is how fast your body has been running while you were. The gap between those two numbers is not fixed. It's not written into your DNA, and some of what's widening it has nothing to do with the things you've been told to worry about. I came across this while looking into something more specific, why some people in their 70s seem biologically younger than others in their 50s. What I found pulled me somewhere I didn't expect. So I went deeper. Every cell in your body contains chromosomes, and at the end of each chromosome sits a telomere, a repeating sequence of DNA that acts like the plastic tip on a shoelace. It protects the chromosome from fraying, and every time the cell divides, that telomere gets a little shorter. This is normal, this is aging, but the rate at which telomeres shorten is not the same for everyone. In 2004, a research team led by Alyssa Eppel at the University of California, San Francisco, published a landmark study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. They compared telomere length in healthy women who were caregivers for chronically ill children, a group under sustained long-term psychological stress, against a control group. The women with the highest perceived stress had telomeres shorter on average by the equivalent of at least a decade of additional biological aging. Not a decade of additional life, a decade of additional aging. The same cells, the same calendar age, a 10-year gap in biological wear, produced not by disease, not by genetics, but by stress. What's eating your telomeres is not always what you think it is. There is a process happening in your body right now called glycation. It sounds technical. The mechanism is simple. When sugar molecules circulate in the bloodstream, they attach to proteins and fats through a chemical reaction they weren't invited to. The result is a class of compounds called advanced glycation end products, AGS. It's a name that didn't arrive by accident. AGS cross-link proteins that are supposed to move freely. They stiffen collagen in the skin. They stiffen arteries. They accumulate in the lens of the eye. They promote inflammation at the cellular level, and inflammation is one of the primary drivers of accelerated biological aging. The sugar involved isn't just the teaspoons you add to coffee. Ultra-processed foods, engineered for palatability, dense with refined carbohydrates and fructose, produce glycation at a rate that whole foods do not. The damage is slow, invisible, and cumulative. By the time it shows up anywhere measurable, it has been accumulating for years. This is not a lecture about diet. It's a description of a biochemical process that most people have never heard of, running continuously with effects that compound over time. And yes, I say all this while still ordering pizza more often than I'd like to admit. That charred, bubbling cheese on top? That's the Maillard reaction. That's AGEs, forming right there on the crust. Knowing the mechanism doesn't automatically fix the behavior. That's a different video. Here's the part that genuinely surprised me. In 2016, Japanese cell biologist Yoshinori Ohsumi received the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for discovering the mechanisms of a process called autophagy. The word comes from Greek, self-eating, and that's roughly what it is. When the body goes without food, during fasting, during caloric restriction, cells activate a cleanup program. They begin breaking down damaged proteins, malfunctioning organelles, toxic debris that has accumulated over time, and recycling the components. Autophagy is essentially the cell taking out its own trash. For decades, this process was known to exist, but not understood. Ohsumi's work in yeast identified the genes that control it and showed how the machinery operates, work that translated directly into understanding human biology. Most people who know about fasting think of it as a weight loss tool. What the Nobel Committee recognized in 2016 was something different, that fasting triggers a cellular rejuvenation process that the body cannot run while it's busy digesting. A quick personal note, separate from the research above, I stumbled onto a book during my research. It's called Stop die Umkehr des Alterungsprozesses, which translates to roughly Stop Reversing the Aging Process, by Andreas Campobasso. It's German only, so if you don't speak the language, you won't get much use out of it. Not everything in it is scientifically backed, but some of the ideas I genuinely find compelling. For example, the emphasis on dark green vegetables like spinach, kale, and broccoli, which contain chlorophyll and compounds that may help reduce inflammation and neutralize oxidative stress. I haven't put its full protocol into practice myself yet, so consider that an honest disclaimer, not an endorsement of results. Exercise turns out to be the exception here. Not a lecture, an actual mechanism you can point to. In 2008, a research team led by Lynn Cherkas at King's College London examined telomere length in 2,401 twins, 2,152 women, 249 men, comparing those with the highest levels of leisure time physical activity against the least active. The result, leukocyte telomere length, was roughly 200 nucleotides longer in the most active group. That number sounds small. It isn't. A separate analysis of Nain's data, led by Larry Tucker at Brigham Young University, translated that gap into biological age and landed on a difference of roughly 9 years. 9 years, measured in the same currency as everything else in this video. Physical wear, recorded inside your cells, not from a supplement, not from a fasting protocol, from ordinary, self-reported movement. And the body doesn't reward intensity for its own sake. Later studies suggest the relationship looks more like a curve than a straight line, with moderate activity often outperforming extremes. But the floor effect holds. Sedentary is where the damage accumulates fastest. Stress doesn't just feel bad. It runs a measurable biological program in your body that, if sustained, leaves a physical record. Cortisol, the primary stress hormone, suppresses telomerase, the enzyme responsible for repairing telomeres. Under chronic stress, telomerase activity drops, repair slows, and shortening accelerates. The cells don't know the difference between a deadline and a predator. The biochemical response is similar. Sleep deprivation compounds this. During sleep, the body runs cellular repair processes it cannot run during waking hours. Chronic sleep loss is consistently associated with shorter telomeres and elevated inflammatory markers. It's not just fatigue, it's measurable biological damage that accumulates quietly over time. Of everything in aging research, this is the finding that surprised me most. Loneliness is a biological accelerant. A 2025 study published in Epidemiology and Psychiatric Sciences, tracking more than 6,000 Americans over a decade through the Health and Retirement Study, found that loneliness significantly predicted early mortality, deaths before the age of 85, across all age groups studied. Physiologically, chronic loneliness is associated with elevated cortisol, increased systemic inflammation, and suppressed immune function. It activates the same stress pathways as physical threat because for a social species that evolved in groups, isolation is a form of danger. The body does not distinguish between feeling alone and being in trouble. It responds to both the same way, with a stress response that, sustained over years, ages you from the inside. This is probably the most underreported finding in aging research. It doesn't sell supplements, it doesn't fit into a wellness routine, and it requires something harder than a dietary change. Two people, same birthday, same city. The gap between their biological ages wasn't determined at birth. It was built, slowly, through 1,000 small and invisible processes, some dietary, some hormonal, some cellular, and at least one that has nothing to do with the body at all. You have more control over your biological age than most people realize, not through expensive interventions or dramatic overhauls, through understanding what is actually happening inside your cells, and recognizing that some of what's aging you has been hiding in plain sight. The calendar keeps moving at the same pace for everyone. The clock inside your cells does not.